But do something. Each and every one of you need to do something. Every day. Throughout your day. How many of you have children who share the same values that you do? And if they don't, why don't they? What didn't we do? How many of you have an impact on what's going on in your schools? Not your schools like a school here, where we teach the truth, but in our public schools. You know the most popular history textbook in America? The one that's used in more schools than any other textbook was written by an anti-American Marxist named Howard Zinn. It teaches a view of history that none of you in this room would ever recognize. But that is what's being taught to more children than anything else in America. Do we know if it's in your school district? Do you know what's going on in your own business? Now, if you're a small business person, you own your own business, that's great, but most people don't own their own business. They work for corporations, and they have corporate policies. And some of you may be saying, gee, I really don't like the policies they're putting in place right now. What are you doing about it? How do you think they got there? They got there because people like you complained to get them there. And people like you sat by and let it happen while they changed. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. And we have allowed very few people to be very squeaky and transform this country while good, decent Americans have sat by. And look, I was one of them. I was going to kick at the idea that I come and speak to a pro-life audience because, and it was wonderful for Suzanne to read all of the pro-life accomplishments. What she didn't read was for the first 5 years I was in the Congress, 4 in the Congress and 1 in the Senate, I never said the word abortion. In fact, I vowed never to. When I first decided to run for Congress, way back many, many years ago, in 1990, I didn't even know if I was pro-life or not. I had to make a decision and sat down with a group of physicians to sort of say, okay, what's the science here? What is this thing in the womb? When does it become a human life? And when I realized what that was, when I realized that this moment of conception, there was a genetically human organism that was living, therefore human life, it was hard for me to say, well, that human life is not protected under the Constitution, but at some point it becomes protected. I said, wow, if we do that, that's as a lawyer. So that's legally, I can't legally justify that. And so I didn't come from it from the point of being a Catholic or from the point of being a person of faith or any article. I just said, from a legal reasoning point of view, you can't just draw lines arbitrarily. And that's why I became pro-life. And after that, I said, okay, I'm pro-life. I'd be very happy to say that, but here's what I know. And I knew this because I had done a lot of work politically and worked on campaigns before I ever ran for office, but I was always active in politics. And here's what I knew, that anybody that spoke out on these issues, they were a nut. Okay? They were a nut. They were marginalized by everybody. They were marginalized. I've come from Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania, you think, oh, it's a modern liberal state. Yeah, but we had a Democratic pro-life governor not too long ago. So it's a state that's very balanced, pro-life, pro-choice. And so to see something where, again, the state's sort of divided, and yet anybody who spoke about abortion, it's one thing to be pro-life. It was another thing to actually articulate and fight for it. Because if you did that, well then, you were a zealot, right? Here's what I found about the media, and it's true not just here, but I'm sure it's not just in Pennsylvania, across the country, is it's okay for you to be pro-life because they look at the country and they see, well, a lot of people are pro-life, so of course they're going to be pro-life people. I mean, they're going to be pro-life congressmen and senators and maybe pro-life presidents. And they have to accept that reality. What they don't want is they don't want you to say anything about it. Because they want to be able to control the narrative. They want to be able to go out there and tell the American public what the truth is. And they don't want anybody else out there arguing with them. This is the view of the left. They hate competition. They hate it. whether it's on the issue of marriage, shut up. We're going to intimidate you to be quiet. That's what these subpoenas in Houston were about. Shut up about this, or you're going to pay a price. Anybody step up, we're going to hammer. Be quiet. You can be pro-life. Shut up about it. I was at Yale University 2 years ago. I spoke to a group called the Yale Political Union. I'd spoken there about 5 years before on the issue of radical Islam. It's a debating society at Yale. It's been around for 100 years, I bet. And they asked me to come and speak, and 4 or 5 years before, so 7 years ago, I guess now. And they had about 300, 400 people there. They said that's their normal crowd. The place was pretty full. And it was a wonderful little debate, sort of British style, so if they like what you're saying, they bang on the table. If they don't, they hiss. And so they asked me to come back, and it was a sort of a fun time. I said, sure, I'll come back. And here's what they asked me to talk about. Resolved. It's always a debate topic. Resolved. The government is destroying the American family. Now, this is September 2012. How many people do you think, how many students at Yale University showed up to hear Rick Santorum talk about whether the government is destroying the American family? 2,000. 2,000. It's the largest crowd in the history of the Yale Political Union. They had to move the location twice. They packed the place out. And here's what I did. I got up and said, well, let's first define our terms. What's the family? What is the family? What is the nature of the family? What's the history of the family? What's the purpose of the family? What's the purpose of marriage within the family? What's the benefit of marriage and family to society? What's the state of the family today? What's the impact on children and society and the economy? All of those things are very quantifiable. And so we just laid out all the facts. Nothing about same-sex marriage, nothing about anything other than what is marriage, what is family, what is purpose, and what is the impact of the breakdown of the family. And then what was government's role, both positive and negative, and frankly, there is positive and negative. And so I laid this all out. 45 minutes. Had a few questions. Finished up. They had a chance to rebut. I spent an hour and 15 minutes afterwards, maybe a couple hundred kids, who came up to me, one after another, and guess what was the most common comment they made to me after my speech? Left, right, didn't matter who, gay, straight, you name it. They all said the same thing. I've never heard any of that before. They're certainly not hearing it at Yale. But they didn't hear it in their schools either. They certainly don't hear it in the popular culture. If you think about how the popular culture looks at marriage. When I was growing up, there was Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best, right? Fathers were held up in society. Family and marriage was something that was reinforced as a value. It was a good thing. Now look at how fathers are portrayed in society today. If there's a father at home at all, he's Homer Simpson, right? Or what a guy named Bundy in whatever that one. They're idiots. They're an appendage that the family would be better off without them. And of course, in most families, there is no father there. That's how society is reinforced of what marriage and family is in America today. And the question is, why have they not heard this? Because if you speak up on this issue, they hammer you. And so we keep our head down. Well, I was struggling along 5 years, never had anything to do with abortion, any of these social issues, because they were hot button. So I got elected to the United States Senate after winning 2 impossible races, literally impossible races, for the House and Senate. My first race, that was just one little story. I ran against a 14-year Democratic incumbent. I got 0 money from anybody in Washington, D.C. Nothing. They wouldn't even meet with me in the Republican Congressional Committee, their campaign committee. Because I was a loser. I mean, this guy won by big margins, and I was in the Democratic district. I didn't have any money, no chance. So on election night, it was reported that the incumbent congressman